Hey everybody, welcome back to another week and another episode of Lionheart Radio with your host, Rick Alexander. Thanks for tuning in. Today I'm speaking with Dr. Katie Pate. She has a PhD in neurophysiology. She is a really, really smart person. I really enjoyed this conversation. For some reason, the audio, we just can't seem to get it right with me and her, so my voice is a little bit crackly, but she comes through just fine, and since she's the smart one on the call, I think it's okay. So today we talk about when to trust our intuition and also when to rely on wearable technologies. And we also talk about a lot of the different wearables and some of the inherent problems that come along with using them. We also talk about some of the ways that we might be able to utilize them in order to get the most out of our training. So I think this was a very beneficial conversation, one that is becoming more and more relevant as technology continues to advance. And so I hope you guys enjoy this one. On to the show. For people that are listening, this is our second attempt at trying this, and the first time, I couldn't get my shit together from the technical standpoint, so we're going to try it again. But a lot has transpired since then, so this is a really cool conversation. The first time, what we wanted to really talk about is this idea that it's hard now in 2018, we have so many technological advances as it relates to athletics, that it's hard for people to know when to trust the technology and when to trust themselves. So, of course, the things I'm talking about are heart rate monitor, HRV. There's just so many these days. But what's cool is, since the last conversation we've had, you've just had this experience where you were really forced to listen to your body because you are a competitor. You ran your first ultra marathon, I believe it was. Mm-hmm. And then you can fill us in, but you were getting ready to bike the very next day, and then you ended up having to sort of pull yourself back and pull out of the race.
Yeah. So essentially, I guess I can give the whole story behind this.
Sure.
I've always been an athlete my whole life, but I've always been more of a power athlete and a sprinter. Endurance has just never really been my thing. Although I do enjoy it, I've never been good at it. And I really never did anything that, far, biking wise or running especially. And, earlier this year, probably around May or so, I contacted George at Softly, and I was, following what he was doing. And I was like, could you get me ready to run an ultra in, September? I run like 5 miles. I'd like to run 42 or 41 or whatever it was. He was like, yeah, no problem. Like, the enthusiasm from him is always there. So he was like, his confidence made me confident. And he set me up with a training program. And I wanted to do 40 and change, mountain pass run from Crested Butte to Aspen. It's all mostly above 10,000 feet. And the vert is like, 7,000 feet of elevation gain over the course of those, 40 miles. And my goal was to be able to do the ultra run on one day. And then the second day, there's a mountain bike back. So you go back over these mountain passes. And the biking was never really a mental challenge for me because I've been a mountain biker. And even though the distance is kind of far, it was like, this is my sport. I love this. I can do it pretty well. But the run is going to be a challenge. So I had been really exploring my own physiology and my own even psychology with this, really long endurance training over the summer, and getting to know my own responses to these long runs and how my body is reacting to this endurance training. And I was excited to go into the event. And prior to running this event last weekend, the longest I had run was 3 weeks before that. And that was a 26-mile mountain bike followed by a 26-mile trail run. And so that was the farthest I had gotten prior to running, last weekend. And so I went into it feeling pretty confident, but knowing it was still going to be a challenge, and just had to trust the training. And I did the ultra run the first day, and certain pain starts to settle in after a certain distance. It's just inevitable.
Right.
You start to have achy joints and maybe some blisters on your feet, that kind of thing. And I was experiencing that, but I had a blast. The whole time I'm smiling. I'm just in awe of where we are. It was beautiful.
Yeah.
And so the pain wasn't really that big of a deal until maybe somewhere between mile 20 and 30, I was descending. And again, the trail was mostly straight up or straight down. There were very few flat sections. And I was descending, and I stepped on a rock that I don't know if it moved or what. Wasn't looking at it when it happened, but I tweaked something in my right knee I don't know what. It just started hurting a lot. It was like a sharp pain at the back of my knee. And I was like, okay, this is different. This is a little bit weird. Maybe I'll run it out. Maybe over the next few miles, I'll just kind of like run differently, change up my gait, see what's going on. So I started playing around with how I was moving to see if that might help. Unfortunately, nothing I did made it any better. It just kind of kept getting worse. And the last 5 miles of this run, it was like 3,500 feet of descending. I mean, it was just brutally steep. Like by the time I got to the finish, man, I was so stoked to be done and to finish this awesome event. And I started doing this like self-check. I'm like, okay, cool. I'm good. Let's get some fluids and some food and start like assessing the situation here. And everything was kind of normal, expected pain for me, except for this right knee thing. And I was like, this is really, really weird. I don't know what's going on. So I told myself that I would sleep. I'd, go to sleep that night, just try to get some rest, take a hot shower, do some massage, whatever I could do to get, this pain going away, and assess in the morning. So the next morning I got up, it was like 4 a.m, super dark, super cold. And I'm outside and I'm just pedaling around by myself, just trying to like feel what's going on in the knee. And every pedal stroke was just really painful. And I don't know, like at the time I was like, I don't know what's going on in there. Mm-hmm. If every pedal stroke on a flat section of gravel is painful, like I don't know that this is smart to get on this course, because God forbid something blows up in my knee and then I need to be taken off the course. Like it'll be difficult to get myself off. People are going to have to help me. I'm going to put them in jeopardy potentially. And then, I was thinking about it and like, man, if I really fuck up my knee by doing this thing, like this could be, I'm a skier and a snowboarder and I'm just always doing stuff. Like this could put me out for an extended period of time. And like, for what, and I sat there in the dark, cold morning on my bike, just like, what do I do? What do I do? And of course, like the competitor in me is like, just fucking suck it up and go. Like, who cares? Just get out there. And I really struggled with it for a really long time. And I didn't know what to do. And in my heart, I knew that the right move was to not compete. But, this deeper sense of like, I've been training for this. I've been, hoping to get some funding and raise awareness for the Green Beret Foundation doing this. I felt like I had people rooting for me and hoping that I would do all of these things. And, I just had to be honest with myself and make that tough call of like, all right, the smartest thing actually is to pull myself out of this race today. If I get out there and something bad happens, I'm going to absolutely regret it, knowing that I had this feeling, going into it. And so that was, in light of our more recent conversation that we had last week, it was like, man, this is timely that we were just talking about. Sometimes, like you've got to make that tough decision and listen to your body. And, this whole sense of intuition and listening to your body doesn't always mean that, you're going to make decisions that are going to feel good. Like sometimes you have to make those tough decisions and it's going to suck and there's going to be a lot of disappointment there, but you have to just trust yourself that that's the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. And I made a post about it. It's like, you've got to remove the ego and the pride, because, people who care about you and know you are going to be happy that you're, making the right choice. If people are judging you for it and calling you a pussy or a quitter or whatever it is, those people don't matter. They don't know you. They're not worth your time. You just have to get those people out of the equation, and focus on making the right choice for you.
Yeah. I like that you said that, because I know I want to focus more on science in this interview, because that's your thing. But, intuition exists independently of the ego. And that's what we have to remember. Like when we have intuition about something, when we are like, even if we're doing something that we know is wrong and we're doing it anyway, like it literally exists independent of our ego. So our ability to follow our intuition a lot of times is dependent on us with the ability to shelf our ego for a minute, to put that aside to try to make the right decision. So I thought that was interesting that you brought it up, because I'm always grappling with these two sides of who we really are. So we can unpack that whole thing a little bit. If we could get a little background for the listener. Were you athletic going into this?
Yeah. So I've always, I've been a mountain biker now for about 8 years, ever since I lived in Colorado, really. Mm-hmm. Prior to that, I did sprint triathlons when I was living in Florida. I was, swimming and running and biking.
Been an athlete.
Yeah. I've been an athlete really my whole life. I grew up with 3 older brothers, and I was always trying to, do what they were doing, and they were always doing athletic stuff. So for me to keep, tag along, I had to kind of keep up, and was just always on a bike or running. Or like, I remember my first gym membership was in 7th grade because I wanted to hang out with my brothers, and they were just there all the time. So I was like, I'm going to tag along and go do this. So I feel like I've definitely developed a good sense of self in an athletic way because I've been doing this for so long. So I have I would say a strong intuitive sense. I don't know that decision last weekend would have been as easy for me to make the right call had I not developed this over, the years.
Yeah. And that's the reason that I'm pointing it out. It's like, I can remember when I was younger, growing up in football and all these different things, like I would always make the decision to keep the hammer down no matter what, no matter how hurt I was. But then all of a sudden, like there's something that shifts in you as an athlete, as you kind of get the reps and develop more of your intuitive sense about training, you start to shift perspective a little bit, and you realize like, okay, there's more that has to exist outside of this weekend. Like I want to be an athlete for the long term. And I think that's like what it really comes down to. Are you trying to win this one game, or are you trying to win all of the games for all of the time? You know what I mean?
Totally.
Or keep playing for all time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was going to say, I think for some people it's like this sense of the regret of not competing, and the regret, like this feeling of quitting, I guess, like really, I think settles with a lot of people when they choose to not do something. It's like they feel like they're quitting, and that is an ego thing, and it's very difficult to separate those two. And I struggle with it sometimes too. I mean, it's not like I just am like, oh, this is so easy for me, but like I still struggle with that stuff. I think that sense of like, I'm a quitter, I don't want to be a quitter, I don't want to have regrets, I don't want to live with any kind of regret. People have a tendency to live from that place and always push, and like you said, keep the hammer down, pedal down, whatever, like full speed ahead, and maybe not pausing to check in and assess, as frequently.
Right. And so if we can tie in this idea of where analytics come into play and where technology comes into play with our training, one of the things I think that is beneficial about using HRV, and maybe we could talk a little bit about what that is, and using the heart rate monitor and all these other inputs, is while you're developing that intuitive sense, they sort of give you something to bounce your ideas off, or where you think you are. It gives you a little bit more relation into like what's going on in your body, a little more of a sense of it anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those are important tools. I think that, this stuff that is being developed as technology is becoming more and more advanced, like we should be using a lot of it as a tool. I don't think that we need to rely on it 100%. I think that's a huge mistake, but I think that there are tools out there, and why not make use of them? And for those of us who, don't have as good of an intuitive sense with our own physiology, psychology is a whole other component of that intuition and awareness. But with just the physiology piece, I mean, there are a lot of tools out there right now that people can use.
So let's talk about some of those tools and what you think, because I know in the last time when we recorded this, I'm going to probably have to re-say a whole bunch of things that we've already said. But,
yeah, it's all good.
Right. So we talked about like some of the recommendations, and we also talked about how some of the studies that are being put out are often funded by the actual people that are selling the product, and so they might not be super reliable. And so can you give us a little insight into maybe what products you would rely on as far as technology goes in training?
Yeah. I think for basic heart rate stuff, really, if you're trying to go for accuracy, anything that's going to be a chest strap that's measuring electrical impulses is going to be way more accurate than anything like, the wearables, the Fitbits and the wrist stuff, because of the way it's measured on your wrist. It's basically measured by, if you look at the back of your watch, you'll probably see a little green light, and the little green light essentially is, it's emitting green light essentially that penetrates your skin, and it gets absorbed by your tissues and your blood, the blood that's at the surface. And it measures heart rate by the swelling and contracting of your arterial vessels, essentially, that are by the skin. So with every heartbeat, you have a pulse that has this volume of blood that gets pushed down your arteries. And the arteries kind of expand with every heartbeat. And the green light will be absorbed more when you have more blood flowing past it, and it'll reflect back very little. And there's a little detector on the back of the watch that picks that up. So it essentially measures your pulse by the swelling of your vessels and the difference in the amount of green light that is absorbed and then reflected back to the watch. So you could imagine with a lot of movement, with sweat. So if you have sweat or if you're underwater, if you have any kind of interference, like you could have a very inaccurate heart rate measured via watch. Now, if you have something that is measuring electrical impulses and it's around your chest, that's going to be a lot more accurate. But then you have to ask yourself, well, do I really want to wear a chest monitor or chest strap every time I'm doing something? It gets really irritating. But if you're going for accuracy, maybe that's something that you want to use. It depends what you're using it for. Heart rate variability is also equally as tricky, if not, I mean, it's trickier really than just measuring your pulse. And there are multiple devices out there that claim to do this. It's that heart rate variability, I would say, has huge potential to guide human performance. But the devices that we're using in the consumer market aren't really that accurate yet. And they, there are little bunch of different parameters about heart rate variability that you could be measuring, and that's not always clear about, what's being measured from each device. So that can be a little bit tricky. I'm a little hesitant to really say that any of these devices are super accurate for heart rate variability. But again, for just general ballpark heart rate, I think that the wearables, whether it's a watch or a chest strap, could be somewhat informative. The things that have an accelerometer that are measuring activity that can be helpful. Sometimes these things are also able to measure sleep, although I know Fitbit got into a class action suit over the inaccuracy of their sleep. And this was, I think, out in California. So maybe not surprising. I don't know. I don't know what. Yeah. So there was a big class action suit about it not being accurate. I think overestimating sleep by like 60 minutes or something like that. So I guess I'm saying all of this to say that all of these devices should be used with caution, knowing that they are not a definitive source of information about your physiology. They should be used as a tool and as a guide to help you figure out, man, I feel like shit right now. I wonder what's going on. And you're checking your heart rate and it's pretty dang close to max. That would be a good indicator of like this feeling that I have right now. If I can try to like bring awareness to it and capture that, that's what's going on when my heart rate is going through the roof. Mm-hmm. So in situations like that, I think it can be extremely helpful. And I don't know, I mean, there's one product that is pretty accurate that's been used in research a lot, but it's extremely expensive and it's hard to find. It's the Zephyr bioharness. And the military uses this a lot as well. But again, it's like, how much money are we all willing to spend as consumers on these products,
Yeah, for sure.
It can be a little bit too much sometimes, I think.
Okay, I got some notes here. So I think my first comment is who the fuck is suing Fitbit because they're like, they said I slept more than I did. Like,
you know what
are people doing?
I don't know. I think it was one of those things where I think the claim was that and people are going to have to look this up for themselves. So, I'm not a legal expert here, but it was something about they spent more money on the device that apparently measured sleep, and all these devices that measure sleep are way more expensive. And they bought the more expensive device for the sleep option. And then the sleep option is inaccurate. And then they're suing. And there were like 1,000 people in this class action suit against Fitbit. And I think they settled and each person's going to get like $5 or something, like something stupid. But
right.
The thing people need to remember is that these devices are not regulated as medical devices. So the FDA is not, saying, hey, this is cleared and it's accurate and it can be used diagnostically for medical situations. That is not at all what's going on here. These are consumer electronics, and the regulation, I mean, there are consumer protections, of course, if they're making claims, and that's how this Fitbit lawsuit arose. They're making claims, they have to be held to those. But again, people need to remember that these things are very different than medical devices, very different than things that are used in laboratory research. Mm-hmm. We have way more accurate tools to use in a research laboratory. But the idea is translating this kind of technology to the everyday life. And so while we're getting better at technology, there's going to be this transitional period of, it's not quite accurate, but it's close enough. So hopefully it can help you. And, I think that that's something people just need to remember, that, these companies aren't doing this on purpose. It's just that the technology hasn't caught up yet with the demand for knowledge, and we're getting there.
Yeah, and I mean, in the fitness industry in particular, it's one of the reasons I hate the supplement industry, but it's this idea that these companies are really good at being really misleading. They're good at acting like their studies mean something, when typically I just think that a lot of people are going to fund a study and it's not going to be done well, but it allows them to say something about their product. So like as a consumer, that's just something you have to be careful of.
Yeah, it's like we were talking about last time, and nobody has time to get a good foundation of the scientific method and all of the ways to learn how to research these things, which sucks. And these companies know it. They know that if they put a publication out that was funded by themselves, and it wasn't even a peer-reviewed journal, it was just some pamphlet or some PDF or whatever they published, and they said, hey, we did this study and this is what happened. And you're reading just a title or just a headline, and all you see is like, Fitbit is proven, scientifically accurate for measuring heart rate, and, beats out whatever else wearable you want to, like that kind of thing is all you see when you do a Google search, and you're like, okay, cool. I have about 5 minutes to educate myself. All I see are some titles. It all kind of like seems, good. I'm just going to go ahead and buy that product.
Right.
I get that none of us really have time. But, if you're not going to invest the time, don't have high expectations too.
Yeah, right. And I mean, some of these get pretty expensive. So then you're like, you might want to invest the time when you're talking about spending a lot of money. So if we can start with the heart rate thing. So if a heart rate monitor is incorrect, so let's say like even the Fitbit and the Garmin's that kind of they don't have the chest strap, but they just read with a green light on your wrist. Mm-hmm. Is it correct to assume that if they're incorrect the same way all the time?
I'd say generally speaking, I think that certain activities make it way worse. So like I said, like swimming or sweating a lot, anytime you've got water interference, it can definitely be a problem. And ironically, activity makes them a little bit less accurate.
Right.
Even I mentioned the Zephyr bioharness that's used in research settings and by the military. They did a treadmill study, and they showed that the higher velocity running actually made it less accurate. So it's like the more activity you have, sometimes these things are a little bit less accurate. So I think that they're really great for assessing baseline, getting a baseline understanding. When you have activity, though, they can be pretty significantly off. I remember getting I went for like a recovery run, and it was like 4 or 5 miles or something, like super low heart rate, like nasal breathing the whole time. And it said I had a peak heart rate somewhere in there at like 210. And I'm like, no, this is not, I know myself well enough to know that never happened.
Damn.
And had I not had that knowledge, I might look at that and be like, whoa, I really don't know my body. Oh my God, I really don't know what my body is telling me. How did I miss that? And then you start getting super confused. So yeah, I think that generally, if they're off, they may be consistently off by 10 beats per minute or something like that. But just keep in mind, during activities and other things that involve water, you might see more of a variability in your numbers.
Yeah, I think as an online coach, one of the things that I loosely use heart rate for is essentially to track trends over time.
Yep.
And hopefully, the idea would be that you can recreate the environment and whatever you're testing as accurately as possible, or as similar as possible to the last time, so that it can be as accurate as possible.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So if you go out and you run and you sweat pretty consistently, and it's always the situation when you're running. Like, I think that comparing those, like the measures you get during that scenario where the parameters are pretty similar, like that's helpful to compare.
Sure.
Over time. Yeah.
Cool. So I was working with, or I thought about working with Omega Wave, who makes a heart rate variability monitor, and they do this. The thing that they do is they hook you up to these electrodes every morning, and you basically try to simulate the exact same environment, 5 minutes, completely horizontal, breathing the same way every time, and then you get your HRV, and it tells you whether you're recovered or not, basically, for the day. And it basically tells you on whether you should go hard that day or whether you should take it easy. And so I tried to listen to it. And one of the stories I told you last time was because of my schedule, because it's super hectic, I only have so much time to train sometimes. So it was like, it told me, definitely don't. You are not recovered at all. And I was like, it's my only time to train. I have to. And so I went out and I PR'd my half marathon, and I felt fucking great after. All day I felt great. It wasn't like a thing where it was like I just used whatever last resources I had and got there mentally. It was like, no, I literally feel better. Like I'm completely fine. It was completely wrong. And so for that reason, I was like, I don't think this is something, because I'm going to take up my time with.
Yeah.
But we've attempted to explain HRV on this show before, and I feel like we've pretty well fucked it up every single time. So can you explain maybe what it is, and then we can talk about whether people should want to rely on it or not?
Totally. Yeah. So heart rate variability, it's kind of complex, but the simplest way to explain it, which I know people have explained it this way before, is just the variability that you get between beats. So it's not necessarily like your rate is like a certain number of beats per minute, but when you look at where those beats occur, is it like, you get 3 beats in the first second, and then you get 1 beat every second after that. And it's like this inter-interval timing basically for the heartbeats. And the more sympathetic arousal you have, so the more you're into this, fight or flight or adrenaline, mode or activity mode, the more regular those beats become. The sympathetic nervous system exerts influence on your heart rate that controls it in a very, it's a little bit elevated, but it's also a more regular rhythm. And when you're in more of a parasympathetic state, so you're more rested, you're in a more calm state, your heart rate is less under the influence of those sympathetic impulses, and now is more able to fluctuate based on your breathing, based on normal changes in blood pressure that get masked. Yeah. I mean, like all of this stuff that happens when you're resting that changes heart rate gets masked by your sympathetic nervous system when you're out running or you're highly stressed. It basically, all of those little nuances that happen in a rested state that really make you more resilient, that gets masked the more sympathetic nervous system input that you have. And so your heart rate becomes more regular. So your variability in between, the timing of those beats, when your sympathetic nervous system is active, the heart rate variability goes down because it's much more rhythmic in the, I guess the same timing is the rhythm is consistent, I guess. Whereas, when you're in a rested state, if you've ever noticed, and anyone who does breath work probably has an awareness of this, but in a rested state, as you take a deep breath, a slow, deep breath, you can feel your heart rate increase. And as you exhale, you can feel your heart rate decrease. And that is called respiratory sinus arrhythmia. It's basically an arrhythmia, but it's sinus meaning normal. It's a normal rhythm that happens just due to breathing. And you miss that when you have high sympathetic drive input controlling your heart rate. So really, heart rate variability, even though it sounds like it may be something you don't want, you actually want increased heart rate variability. It means that your parasympathetic nervous system is really more dominant than the sympathetic nervous system inputs, which means you're more relaxed, probably in a calmer state. I think it also sets you up to be more resilient to handle any kind of stressor that comes your way. because you have the flexibility now to have your body respond appropriately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then I guess the idea would be is if you're parasympathetic, that's when you can recover. You can't recover if you're responding to something.
Exactly. Yes.
So I think probably my skepticism would come from 2 points, and you can tell me if I'm way off or not. The first one would be, can an app on your phone capture something so finite? That would be like my first skepticism. And then I think my second one would be, do we have algorithms that are so well developed that they can account for all of the individual biological differences that we all have?
Yeah, those are good questions. And the short answer is that there is not an app out there yet that I'm aware of that is able to capture this appropriately. And I say that because if you ever look at an EKG and you look at the waveforms of the electrical activity of your heart, there's multiple things that are happening when your heart contracts, your whole heart. There's multiple parts of your heart that are contracting. And when you measure differences in timing, there are multiple parts of this heart rate that can be assessed to determine heart rate variability. And if you're just looking at from one point of this waveform to the next, you get kind of like a general idea of heart rate variability. But again, like I'm not going to go into all of the science because it's just, it's too it's just a black hole here.
Yeah.
But essentially, nothing that's on your wrist is going to be able to detect that. You have to wear a chest strap that is going to measure electrical activity of the heart to do that. So anything that's on your wrist, I would say, is measuring just general gross timing differences between your heartbeat, not all these little nuances of really what makes heart rate variability accurate. So that would be the first, my first response is I'm skeptical about the devices that are wrist worn that are telling you they're measuring heart rate variability, especially when they haven't really validated it against any other standard, like taken it to a lab and said, all right, put this on. We got heart rate variability from this watch thing, and we're also going to compare that to the standard, which is just a polar heart rate monitor chest strap. Mm-hmm. Let's take a look and see what we get. And so I haven't seen that a lot with these companies, but I'm sure they will. That'll happen.
They'll definitely get there, right? But yeah, I think and one of the things you've discussed, it's like, okay, there's physiology and then there's psychology. So when it comes to your training as an athlete, like you really have the complete picture isn't just physiology. So even if they get super accurate, there's still this idea that the mental side of it plays such a big role in our training and our performance.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the mental piece is huge. And I've had those experiences as well. Like you were just saying about, your watch and app were telling you one thing and then, your body was telling you something different. And, I woke up last weekend when I was doing this race. I didn't sleep at all the night before that ultra run because I was staying in a hotel and it's Crested Butte. And I don't blame it, like anyone around me, because I would be doing the same thing if I didn't have to run the next day. But people were just straight partying. Like everyone in the hall, it was like people were there. Yeah, people were there downhilling. It was like a fucking family reunion. Like, I don't know what was going on, but it was like babies crying, people like, chugging beers in the hall. And I'm just like trying to sleep. I'm like, do you guys know what I have to do tomorrow? And I was like miserable. So I probably slept like 10 minutes. So I'm like getting ready that morning, feeling like dog shit. And I'm like, you know what? Like, I'm just going to have to suck it up and go run. And as soon as I started running, I felt amazing. Like I felt so good. I completely forgot that I didn't have any sleep the night before because I just was in it having a blast. And, like I'm sure it would have caught up with me the next day had I mountain biked. But like that day for the run, I don't think the lack of sleep, at least I didn't notice it affecting any kind of performance, which is funny because had I been wearing a watch that told me, right, my rested state, they would have been like in the negative.
I think, to make you feel better, I've had 3 ultras where I've not slept a second the night before.
Oh, yeah.
And then a bunch where I've slept like an hour or something because one, it's like nerves. And then the other thing is like, I don't know, if Murphy can fuck you over, he will. Like,
yeah. Absolutely.
But I think that raises the best point of this whole thing. And it's a line that I'm not quite sure how to tread yet with people that are new to sport, especially when it comes to training them from a distance. Mm-hmm. But it's this idea that if you were to listen to it, it would have told you not to train or not to perform that day. You went out and had a good day. Now, the problem is you know so much about physiology and about yourself and your psychology that you knew like how to kind of get there mentally to perform. Mm-hmm. I think my worry is that if people use some of these things and they don't have a robust background in athletics, they're going to let that affect the psychology component, which is like the only thing you have left essentially at that point.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's like what I was saying about, you know, the run that I had, the recovery run, and it told me I had a heart rate of 210 at one point. And it's like, had I really taken that to heart, it would have definitely changed my outlook on and like decreased my confidence in assessing my own body. And I think to that end, what I would say is, you know, I think that the best thing to do for people who are getting into sports is or getting into training using these things, and they feel like they don't have a good intuitive sense, because a lot of people I've talked to feel that way. They just feel like, you know, too. I have no idea if I'm hurt or if I'm injured. It could be either pain to me tells me to stop, and it's like, well, pain leads to growth, so you absolutely have to have that, you know, in order to get better at what you're doing. So pain, like, you know, pain is a natural part of training, and people have to understand that. But there is a difference in the types of pain you experience that you should be aware of. And I guess as an example, you know, I feel like, maybe to back up a little bit, I feel like the reason for this is that we are all very distracted by a lot of stuff in our daily lives. And so we're always pulled outside of our bodies. Like everything we do is, you know, out in this realm outside of us, and including these apps. When you use a watch or your phone or something, when you're looking at that data and you're assessing it, you're immediately, by definition, pulled outside. Your attention is outside of yourself because it's on this thing that's outside of you. So all of these things that we're doing in our daily lives we're much better at focusing on things external than internal. And that is the very root, I think, of this loss of intuition for people, because it has to do with the loss of awareness, and intuition requires an awareness, an internal awareness, and an understanding of yourself, really. So I think that really what people need to start doing is starting to pay more attention to themselves, bring awareness to themselves, and focus more on, you know, how they're feeling, even if they can kind of objectively look at their psychology. I know that's super hard to do. People are like, how do I look at my own thoughts? But this is something that takes practice, and we're often not good at it, especially in this Western world that we live in, you know, where this isn't a part of our culture. Eastern cultures are like, how do you not do this? You know, but they're raised very differently.
Right.
And so in our society, this is something where, you know, our world exists external to us, and we lose track of that. I think what people can start doing is start paying attention when they go for a run, or when they go lift weights, or they, you know, do something. Like, on some days, don't use anything. Just go out and see how you feel. Or maybe have, you know, wear your stuff, but don't look at it. Just go out and see how you feel. And then maybe check in with your data and see what's going on there, and think back to how you felt. Maybe keep a journal about how you felt. And, you know, maybe something came up where you're like, at this one point, I felt like I was going to die, and, oh, look at my heart rate. Like, that's cool. It actually is really high at that point. So maybe that's me, exerting myself or climbing a hill or whatever it was. I think that that's important to pay attention to. But I think like removing technology allows you to turn your focus inward. And that's the key to developing this intuitive sense. And like, for example, one of the things for me that I've noticed over the years is like, when I go run, it takes me a good hour to like really warm up and feel comfortable. And after an hour, I feel like I could run all day. But for that first hour, my heart rate's kind of all over the place, and it's like I don't feel that good. I feel slow and I feel tired. And, I go through this like wave of stuff in this first hour that's pretty standard for me. But I know that once I get through that, everything is golden. Mm-hmm. But, for me, like if I didn't know that, I'd be like, man, what's off today? Why do I feel so shitty? Like, why does this run suck so bad? My nutrition was great yesterday. I slept great yesterday. And I'd be missing this overall understanding of like, this is a pattern for me all the time. And if I pay attention to myself, I'll pick up on these patterns in myself and I'll know that this is a normal thing. But if I'm completely oblivious, it's like, I don't remember that the previous 3 times I ran, I felt shitty for the first hour. Today I go out and I run and I feel shitty and I'm like, why? What's going on? Like there's that piece of it too that I think people need to or can start to develop.
I think you reframed it in a way I've never really thought about, which is super interesting. And it's like almost the epitome of Western culture, that we're literally looking external to tell us something about what's happening to us internally. Like, yeah, that's wild. Literally what we're doing with wearables.
It is. It's making people less intuitive and less aware and more reliant on these technologies, which exacerbates the situation. And it's like this negative spiral.
Yeah. And to that point, one of the ways that I think that you can do what you're talking about, like that's what I think meditation does for us. And that's why there's sort of a craving for meditation now in Western culture, and why we're sort of seeing an uprising and all of that sort of a thing, because you have your thoughts and you have your thoughts about like what's going on in your body and what your limbs are doing and how you're interacting in the world. One of the things that I think meditation does, and I'm sort of fleshing this theory out, but it helps you get behind your own thoughts. It helps you put your thoughts in front of you. And so I remember I started meditating daily and I never noticed a difference. But then one time I woke up and I was in a shitty mood, just like sort of people get in a shitty mood. You just wake up and you're in a bad mood for whatever reason that day. But then I was able to have the thought, like I was able to actually analyze that shitty mood instead of feel like I was stuck in my own head. And that's like the beauty behind meditation. I think that's like one of the ways it could apply to sport, is like you literally get to look at your own thoughts from a distance, and you get to sort of create distance between them and then analyze whether they're serving you or whether they're not.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. It's like in that first hour of me running, I'm very aware of my thoughts of being like, this sucks. Why am I out here? What am I doing? All of that. And I am like, here I go. I'm doing that thing again. And I know I'm going to be doing it for the next 45 minutes. So let's just roll with it, see what happens, and then like you get through it and you're like, cool. Like now I feel good. And, but you do sometimes. It's like, I think about it as, and I meditate, that's a huge part of my life. And I do somatic based practices. So it's all like rooted in your body. But one of the things I like to think about is like sort of dropping to like the back third of your body. Like if you bring your awareness back there, it almost feels like you're like kind of behind yourself and behind what's happening. And you can observe a little bit better when you feel like you're somewhat like behind it. You're not completely removed from it. You're just sort of behind it all, observing. Yeah. And so it's like this notion of like bringing your awareness and falling back to like the back body. But like sometimes I do that when I'm out exercising or running and I've got a lot of pain. I sort of like drop back to this thing, and it's like I'm just kind of observing this process of what's going on, and it's easier to handle sometimes because of that.
Yeah, that's super interesting. It gets into something that I think is probably you hinted at and talked about a little bit in this process, but it's like, how do we figure out the difference between good pain and bad pain? Because then one of our challenges of an athlete is to see if we can perform regardless of the pain.
Sure.
Right? Yeah. But then that gets into the whole thing that we started talking about, which is, the experience that you just had. Like, you realized it was not beneficial anymore to try to perform regardless of the pain, because you would have been doing more damage than what you would have been gaining that day.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so if we look at that situation, do you have, I kind of know how I do it with online clients, but how can people start realizing whether the pain that they're experiencing is in fact pain that is necessary for adaptation or pain that's hurting them?
I'm not sure people are going to want to hear this, but I honestly think that a lot of it's trial and error.
Yeah, me too.
I really don't know that there is like a silver bullet response to this. I think that it's like from my own experience. I mean, sometimes you have to make a tough decision of like, you know what, I'm going to push through this, and it's not a serious thing. And then you end up being injured and out for a long period of time. I did that. I used to do this when I was racing enduro mountain bikes, and we'd go out and I'm like, oh, I can handle that feature. I can handle this thing. It's no big deal. I don't need to practice it. And, you're just kind of pushing the limits of, one, your technical abilities, but then two, you go and screw up on some obstacle and then you're like in a lot of pain and you push through that pain because you don't want to face this potential injury, and then you end up making it worse. And, you know, there have been times in my past when I've definitely pushed when I shouldn't have, and I learned the hard way that this is going to lead to an injury. And then there have been other times when I've pulled back a little bit, and that the sting of not being able to do something, when afterwards it was like, man, I wonder, you know, I think I could have done it. I think that wouldn't have been a big deal. This thing that I, you know, was feeling really wasn't that big of a deal. And I think both experiences are highly motivating. So whether you take it in one direction or another, I think people, and, you know, unfortunately are going to have to kind of play with that for themselves. The biggest thing you want to avoid is being injured, and, you know, it does suck. But I think it's a personality thing as well, where some people are much more inclined to push through. And I think it also has to do with age. When I was younger, I was certainly way more into just like muscle through it. Yeah, I don't care if I'm injured, I'll bounce back quick, whatever. But as I've gotten older, I've realized that like the richness of life, for me at least, includes, you know, this ability to go do, like, roll off the couch and go climbing one day, go running the next day, go skiing the next day, go whatever the next day. I mean, I like to be outside doing all of these things, and an injury means that you're out, you know, and for me, that's a huge part of like the richness of life is moving. You know, I need movement in my life. So those things I'm less willing to be stubborn and muscle through things that I know intuitively are not going to lead to something good. But again, I've learned that over the years through this trial and error process. And I think a lot of people, even if you're starting this late and you're getting into sports later in life, then, you know, a lot of people, don't let that discourage you. Just start figuring it out. And maybe your threshold is different. Like, everybody's got a different threshold for pain, but a different threshold for injury. Some people are way more resilient than others. Some people experience just, you know, a ton of pain before they actually get injured. You know, and I don't know, as, you know, somebody looking from the outside in, like, I have no idea what is, you know, drives people and what each person is experiencing individually. And as a coach, I'm sure that's a very tough place to be sitting. You know, you really need a lot of feedback from your athletes.
Yeah. And, you know, I like that you said that, because I think a lot of times we want to make things more rudimentary so that we can like understand it better. We want things to be yes or no, like, do I train or do I not train? Like, is like joint pain okay? No, like, you know what I mean? Like, but the problem is, like, as humans, like, and I think that's why I like that you said that, because it's not an easy answer. It never is. Yeah. You have to run up against the wall and know where the wall is sometimes, and that just sucks, and it is literally how it is.
Yeah. But I think that's where the most valuable lessons are. Again, when we're talking about getting to know ourselves and like figuring out this intuitive sense, like, figure out what your limits are, figure out your extremes. Don't go by what other people are doing or saying. Like, we are all different, and you got to figure it out for yourself, if you like it or not. Otherwise, you're never going to maximize your potential.
Right.
If people choose to avoid the upper lower limit extremes of these things, like, they really won't understand, one, their like sweet spot, you know, but then they also just don't, they really never get to that full potential. So it's like, you got to own that as an athlete. You got to just say, you know, a coach is important, but the coach can't tell me what these things are. Like, I've got to figure that out with their help, with their guidance.
Yeah. And your story also highlights that. And I think also why I believe everybody should probably compete in their sport, because competition is never a perfect day. And so it throws variables at you, like, as you just experienced, that you would be so hard to like get those in training. The idea that you're going to get there and people are going to be partying next to you and you're not going to sleep, but you're going to have to perform anyway. Like, it puts you in these situations where you kind of forces you to rise above them. One of the stories I always go back to, but like, and maybe everybody knows it, but Michael Phelps' coach used to fuck with him in training all the time, or in all these lower level meets, because that way when he would get to the Olympics and his goggles would fill with water or something, it wouldn't just completely take him out. So he would, like, you know, I like competition for the fact that it forces all of these variables that we can't compare or prepare for in other ways.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's, you know, these people who try to control every aspect of their training and their lives to have like the perfect nutrition, the perfect sleep, the perfect whatever, because they want to be perfect. It's like, cool, but how resilient are you when you have people partying next to you the night before and you don't get sleep? Your world's going to be fucked. Like, you're going to be upside down because you've controlled everything so perfectly all the time that you literally can't handle anything that isn't perfect, And so I'm not saying go like do something random every day that throws you off, but like there is some truth in that. There's definitely some truth and value in when things don't go right, and figuring out, like, I think an important lesson in that too is understanding your mind. So when things don't go right, like, how do you react? Are you like losing your shit because people are partying and you're just freaking out? Or do you just kind of like, I just laughed at one point. I'm like, of course this would happen, this is great. Like, whatever, and so like, you can push back and you can resist and you can push against all of those variables that come in, or, like the Michael Phelps situation, you can just be like, oh shit, here we go. Goggles are filling with water. Let's just keep going,
Yeah.
And that to me is like what the human being was designed for. We have been designed to be resilient beings physiologically and psychologically. We were not meant to, control these tight parameters and live in this perfect condition and perfect world all the time. We were made to handle stress, good stress, bad stress, physiological stress, psychological stress. So, getting to know yourself, building this intuitive sense, and bringing that awareness back to yourself allows you to play in that space a little bit more, and I think cultivate that resilience.
I agree. I think when you get in that mental space where you can laugh about that kind of stuff, it also becomes another tool. Like, it becomes empowering to realize, like, holy shit, I actually can perform regardless of how much sleep I get or regardless of what gets stacked against me, like that. And that transcends to all the other aspects in life, which is super important.
Yeah. Confidence is key for sure. And those things help.
Right. So leading up to this ultra, like, I guess now that we have a good background about like sort of your outlook and your background in sport, what was the role that technology played in your own training leading up to it? Did it have any at all?
I kind of had fun with, I'm going to go back to the Fitbit sleep app that people were up in arms about.
Are you part of that lawsuit?
No. I don't think Colorado could even participate, to be honest. That was the first time I had an app that tracked sleep. And I thought that was pretty cool to be able to see, like, for instance, I live in Colorado. We love beer out here. So, I used to drink more beer than I probably want to admit. But, one of the things that was fun for me is to like look at how that affected my sleep. And again, we know the Fitbit, sleep monitor is probably not the most accurate in the world, but I do think it was fairly accurate. And again, like, as we were talking about before, if it was inaccurate, it was consistently inaccurate. So I'm not too worried about it, but I use that as an informative tool to kind of see on nights when I had beer before bed, or I did a late, maybe had a super late workout or something. How did that affect my sleep? And sometimes I could see, like, wow, I might have fallen asleep super quickly, but I had real shit quality. Like, I was awake, I was moving around all the time. Like, this was definitely not restful sleep. And the next day, if I felt bad, I could kind of like look back on that and be like, well, that kind of makes sense. Like, my sleep quality for the past 3 nights has been, not that good. And whether the timing is off or not, you can get the general idea of the quality of your sleep. So for me, I think that the sleep aspect was pretty cool to be able to see how different bedtime routines would affect maybe onset to sleep, or the quality throughout the night. Because sleep, I mean, I could talk for days on how important that is, and I think everybody knows that now. But that was something that I was really trying to maximize. I mean, all of the, the gains that you get from what you're doing during the day get locked in during sleep. That includes mental as well, mental stuff. So, you want to maximize that. So I use the sleep tracking, and I kind of use that to maybe change certain behaviors. If I was going to have some beer, do it way earlier in the day. I noticed certain routines that were more helpful for me to get better quality sleep. As for the heart rate stuff, I think maybe my coach, I think George used some of that occasionally to see at the level, the level I was training at. He would want me below a certain heart rate for, my runs that week or something like that. And in order to show him that I wasn't ignoring him, I would have to send him that stuff. And I think in that way, that was helpful for my coach. For me, sometimes too, I think my resting heart rate, I would look at that. Like if I felt just sort of amped up and I wasn't sleeping well and I just felt like almost like my sympathetic nervous system was kind of like driving me, I would take a look and my resting heart rate would be elevated. And it's sort of like I knew it, I felt it, but it was sort of a confirmation of that. So I think for me, technology was kind of like a fun toy.
Yeah, right.
And it was also a tool in some ways, I would say, for sleep. But that really, those are the things that I use the most, I would say, is heart rate and sleep. Other features are just kind of, like tracking your steps. Like that's kind of fun when you're running 40 something miles and you're like, holy shit.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd say that it played a minimal role in my training.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So a couple of comments. Like one, I think you mentioned something there. It's like George would want to know, like, oh, you're not ignoring me. But I think like the reason I think that's beneficial is sometimes like I will program somebody. Let's say I program a 5K and I'm legitimately looking for them to just work on aerobic conditioning. Yeah. We have speed work programmed independently of that, and then I like to program some sort of heart rate threshold in that instance, because sometimes people are like, oh, I felt good and I PR'd my 5K. And I'm like, okay, cool, but you just use resources that we need later on. This week, because there's a method sometimes behind this. It's not just like, go fucking do it. So I think I think that's a good thing. But probably like what I'm sort of hearing from you and what it sort of reinforces what I believe about technology across the board, which is it's good to have and use, but needs to be leveraged properly, because if it's relied on too much, like we're human beings, there's a physiological, biological component to our being that technology just can't always account for. And so if we just rely on it across the board, we end up in some pretty like unsavory places sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I should have given George more credit. I was just trying to keep it light. But yeah, he used the heart rate for the same reasons.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. And I knew that. And, I think that there is a place for it as a coach. I think when you are coaching an athlete, because you cannot live inside them and you don't know what it feels like, you need to see metrics in order to, especially if they're not good at communicating how they feel or what they've been doing. Those metrics as a coach can be extremely valuable to track athlete progress and recovery and all of that over time. Mm-hmm. When you're trying to program for them, like George sometimes would do stuff when I'm like, just completely spent that week and my heart rate was reflective of that during, some easy task. And he would say, okay, let's back off a little bit on the intensity and just go super slow and long type of run, like more of a recovery type of week, restorative type of week. And, I think that as a coach, the coach can kind of like track that better for you when you're not paying attention. Now for myself, I kind of like, I would have self-regulated anyway.
Sure.
But I communicated that to my coach and was like, hey, I'm really tired this week. And he's like, okay, cool. Let's back off and let's do this. Next week we'll ramp it up. And so I think that there's definitely a place for technology in coaching.
I think I was pointing that out because I know I have clients listening to this, and when you sons of bitches have a 5K at level 2 cardio, stop PRing it. No, that's all. Awesome. So I think this was a super informative conversation for people. The final question, Lionheart Kicker, I guess every guest, if you could give blanket advice or guarantee everybody in the world would hear it, what would you tell people? I want to keep it open. We'll just keep it with the same. I think we were going to focus on tech, but it can be whatever you want.
Well, I'll keep it on the intuitive thing. And like, I would say kind of like what we were talking about before. The one thing that I would encourage everybody to do is really set aside all of these distractions. And, tech has a place, wearables have a place, but set aside all of these distractions and things that pull you outside of yourself and really spend some time paying attention to yourself again, and like getting to know yourself in a physiological sense when you push your limits and you run up against that wall, or when you tone it back, but also in a psychological sense too. Like, observe your own thoughts, play with that, and see how that feels. And I know it's, easier said than done, but just start practicing. We have the ability, like, we're all born with an intuitive sense. It just gets layered over by all kinds of shit that we pile up on top of it. And like, I know people have been talking about authenticity lately too. This has been another topic, but I would say that authenticity is born out of this intuitive sense and taking action based on your intuitive sense. And so, in a world of copycats and one-uppers, if you're trying to truly live an authentic life, you have to tap into that intuitive sense and take action, with that in mind to live out an authentic life. And when you don't know who you are and you have no connection with yourself, there's no chance in being authentic because you don't know who you are. So, I would say that, especially with athletic performance, that can be, this intuitive sense in developing that is pretty critical. So.
Yeah, I think, to your point, I think the reason that words like authentic and, I think shit like that is a buzzword right now because we have so many inputs and people are feeling so disconnected from themselves and from the world around them that there's, like I said, like that's sort of the epitome of Western culture. And that's why I think that there's a little bit of an outcry for these other things like meditation and these sort of Eastern culture values that are kind of becoming fad somehow all of a sudden. That are like, this wisdom's like thousands of years old.
Ancient wisdom, yeah.
Right. Now all of a sudden it's like people are like, wait, what is this,
Yeah, it's this cool new thing.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I want to try this new thing called fasting. I'm like, right. Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time and for sharing your knowledge with us.
Thanks for having me.
Perfect. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening to Lionheart Radio. I hope that the information from today's show will make you fitter, happier, and healthier. For the show notes of this episode and every episode, head to www.lionheartrad.io. Yep, just like Lionheart Radio. And please, if you have the time, head over to iTunes and give us a 5-star rating. It really helps us to know that we're on the right track in delivering you reliable information and value. As always, feedback is welcome. If you have any comments on the show or would like to suggest a guest, send me an email at rick@luavive.com. That's LUAVIVE.com. Thanks for your support, and we will see you next time.
Bitch, I feel good. Don't I look stupendous? My shine is so endless, and shit you can do to end this. Even when I'm dead, niggas still gon' bump that chip shit. Coke, white, Escalade on cinches for you dipshit. So you won't forget this. Midwest nigga be the coldest. Cleveland is